When a man with a .45 meets a man with a rifle, you said the man with the pistol's a dead man. Let's see if that's true.
Clint Eastwood isn't just an actor. He's a symbol of grit, restraint, and a kind of rugged cool that Hollywood doesn't make anymore. With over 70 years in film, from his early days in Rawhide to directing Oscar-winning masterpieces like Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby, Eastwood has earned the right to speak plainly about talent. And people listen when he does. But despite his tough exterior and famously squinted silence, Clint has occasionally opened up about the actors who made the deepest impression on him. They're not necessarily the most famous, not always the loudest, but they all share one thing Clint values most: truth. Whether it's in the way they delivered a line, carried a scene without words, or embodied a role so convincingly you forgot they were acting at all, these 5 men, in Eastwood's eyes, are the real deal. So today, we're counting down Clint Eastwood's 5 favorite actors, based on his own words, interviews, and tributes. These are the legends who shaped his craft, earned his admiration, and in some cases, helped define what Eastwood became. Let's dive in, starting with a Western giant who paved the way. Number 5, John Wayne, the Duke of Westerns.
I tell you.
What you saw was a buck wearing Lucy's dress. I found Lucy back in the canyon. Wrapped her in my coat. Buried her with my own hands.
Before Clint Eastwood ever picked up a 6-shooter on screen, there was John Wayne, the Duke, the original icon of the American Western. For a young Clint growing up in the 1930s and 40s, John Wayne wasn't just an actor, he was the cowboy. Towering, commanding, and patriotic, Wayne embodied the old-school image of American heroism that would later influence and, interestingly, challenge Eastwood's own evolution as a Western star. Clint has admitted to enjoying many of Wayne's films. "Depending on the film," he once said with a chuckle. But admiration was always there. Wayne was a larger-than-life presence whose portrayals in classics like Stagecoach, Red River, and The Searchers left an imprint on generations of actors. For Clint, Wayne's confident walk, slow drawl, and rock-solid moral compass were part of the DNA of the cowboy archetype. Eastwood's early westerns in the 1960s, especially the spaghetti westerns directed by Sergio Leone, were a clear departure from Wayne's clean-cut, patriotic style. Where Wayne's character stood for traditional justice and honor, Eastwood's Man with No Name was cynical, silent, and morally ambiguous. Yet Clint didn't reject Wayne. Rather, he redefined the genre that Wayne had built. And even as he turned the cowboy mythos on its head, Eastwood never disrespected the man who made it popular in the first place. In fact, Clint once reached out to John Wayne to propose working together on a Western. After High Plains Drifter came out in 1973, Eastwood reportedly sent a letter to Wayne suggesting a collaboration. It was meant as a symbolic passing of the torch, the old legend and the new rebel, side by side. But the Duke was having none of it. He hated High Plains Drifter, which he saw as too dark and cynical. In a blistering response letter, Wayne criticized the film's portrayal of Western townsfolk and morality, saying it didn't reflect the values of the American frontier. To some, that might seem like a rebuke, but to Clint, it was simply a generational divide. "We were 2 different types of people," he later said in interviews. He wouldn't have understood what I was trying to do. Clint didn't take it personally. He still respected Wayne, even if they didn't share the same cinematic vision. After all, you don't have to agree with someone to admire their craft. When John Wayne passed away in 1979, Clint Eastwood paid quiet tribute. He acknowledged that they never worked together and that their styles would always stand in contrast. But he also admitted that Wayne had left a massive impact on him, particularly in how an actor could create an unforgettable screen persona. Wayne was unapologetically himself, a trait Clint deeply respected. It's easy to imagine Eastwood as the anti-Wayne: less talk, more glare, fewer flags, more shadows. But the truth is more nuanced. Clint borrowed from Wayne's physical presence, his confidence, and his ability to dominate the frame. He just filtered those traits through a modern, more cynical lens.
Stand aside!
You could even argue that Eastwood's evolution of the Western hero wouldn't have been possible without the template that Wayne built. There's also the shared stubbornness. Both men were known for their independence and their refusal to compromise on set. Clint's one-take shooting style echoes the no-nonsense efficiency Wayne was known for. And both preferred working behind the camera later in life, shaping stories that aligned with their values. So, while John Wayne might not have approved of Clint's darker vision of the West, there's no doubt Eastwood admired Wayne's towering legacy. He may have walked a different path, but it was one cleared in part by the Duke's shadow. In interviews, Clint has never tried to erase or downplay Wayne's importance. He simply noted their differences, offered his respect, and moved forward. That's classic Eastwood. Acknowledge the past, but never live in it. John Wayne was a giant, both in stature and in influence. And though Clint Eastwood ultimately carved out his own unique identity in cinema, he never forgot the cowboy who came before him. Number 4. Gary Cooper, the strong, silent type.
The judges left town, Harvey's quit, and I'm having trouble getting deputies.
When people talk about Clint Eastwood's on-screen style, the steely eyes, the few carefully chosen words, the stillness that says more than a page of dialogue, they're often describing a tradition that Gary Cooper helped pioneer. It's no surprise then that Eastwood has long been linked to Cooper, both by audiences and by those who first saw something familiar in Clint's early performances. In fact, during Clint's earliest days in the Warner Brothers lot, studio secretaries nicknamed him Coop. He wasn't entirely sure why at first, but over time he realized the comparison made perfect sense. Like Cooper, Clint had that tall, quiet, slightly aloof presence that made people lean in rather than pull away. And like Cooper, Clint didn't need to shout to be heard. Gary Cooper built his reputation playing strong, moral characters who often found themselves facing impossible odds, and doing it with quiet grace. Films like High Noon, Sergeant York, and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town showcase Cooper's remarkable ability to deliver emotional weight without theatricality. He didn't perform the way some actors did. He simply existed on screen, and the audience came to him. Eastwood clearly took note. Though he would ultimately forge a grittier, more ambiguous persona than Cooper's idealistic characters, the DNA was there. Both men carried themselves with an economy of motion and a refusal to over-explain. It's what some call minimalist acting, but it's more accurately described as trusting the audience. Clint, like Coop, knew when to say nothing at all. Eastwood has acknowledged the influence directly, even as he's clarified that he doesn't consider himself a Gary Cooper clone. "I've never been a fan of any one particular actor except maybe James Cagney," he once said. But he also noted that early in his career, the studio tried to shape him into a Cooper-esque leading man. While Clint resisted being boxed in, he never dismissed the comparison. He understood that being likened to Gary Cooper meant being seen as a serious actor, someone with gravitas. There's also the shared belief in integrity, both on and off screen. Cooper was famously selective about the roles he took, especially as he grew older. He wanted to play characters who stood for something.
If you won't go with me now, I'll be on that train when it leaves here.
I've got to stay.
Eastwood has followed a similar path, turning down roles that didn't feel honest or meaningful to him. Like Cooper, Clint doesn't just act. He crafts a moral world through the choices he makes. One of Cooper's most lasting performances, High Noon, is often cited as a template for the modern Western. The film follows a marshal who stands alone against approaching danger, abandoned by the town he once protected. Sound familiar? Decades later, Eastwood would channel that same emotional isolation in Pale Rider, Unforgiven, and even Gran Torino. The reluctant hero, standing tall against the tide, remains a cornerstone of Eastwood's storytelling, and it owes a debt to Gary Cooper's quiet defiance. But while Cooper's characters were often polished and noble, Eastwood brought a rougher edge. Where Coop was the honorable lawman, Clint often played the weary outsider. Still, the emotional restraint remained the same. Eastwood learned early on that power doesn't always come from raising your voice. Sometimes it comes from lowering it. In many ways, Cooper helped validate the idea that masculinity on screen didn't have to be loud or aggressive. It could be calm, assured, even gentle. Clint took that idea and added layers of grit, ambiguity, and violence. He didn't just copy Cooper, he built upon him. Even visually, the two share similarities. The squinting gaze, the stoic posture, the sense that they're sizing you up before saying a word. It's not hard to imagine that if Gary Cooper had been born 40 years later, he might have ridden into town wearing Clint's boots, or vice versa. So when Eastwood names Gary Cooper among the actors he admires most, he's also revealing something about his own creative DNA. It's not just about style, it's about substance. Cooper's strength came from his calm. His power came from stillness. And Clint Eastwood, the man who would become Hollywood's next great silent force, never forgot the lesson. Number 3, Spencer Tracy, master of naturalism. Clint Eastwood isn't one for excessive praise. He rarely gushes about other actors, and when he does, it means something. So when he speaks highly of Spencer Tracy, calling him a natural, a performer who never seemed like he was acting, it's genuine admiration. Tracy, who built his legacy in films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Captain's Courageous, and Inherit the Wind, was a different kind of Hollywood star. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't showy, his power came from his simplicity. And that, more than anything, is what Eastwood respects. In Tracy's work, Eastwood saw what he would later pursue in his own acting: minimalism with maximum impact. Tracy's performances didn't announce themselves. He wasn't about big gestures or theatrical flourishes. He simply became the character, fully, quietly, and believably. For Eastwood, that was the gold standard. He once said that acting should feel effortless. You shouldn't see the seams. And when watching Spencer Tracy, you rarely did. His line readings were casual, his body language natural, and yet he always commanded the screen. It's no coincidence that Eastwood has modeled much of his own screen presence on this ethos. Like Tracy, he doesn't over-explain. He doesn't oversell. Whether he's playing a grizzled cop, a lone cowboy, or a conflicted war hero, Eastwood lets the scene breathe. He trusts the material, and more importantly, he trusts the audience. In interviews, Eastwood has acknowledged that while he admired actors like Cagney for their energy, he found something equally compelling in Tracy's restraint. Where Cagney exploded, Tracy simmered. Where others reached for emotion, Tracy let it rise naturally. Eastwood learned that sometimes the strongest performance is the one that doesn't feel like a performance at all. There's also a personal connection. When Eastwood was coming up in the business, Tracy's reputation loomed large. He wasn't just admired by audiences. He was revered by fellow actors. Everyone respected his craft. Directors, co-stars, studio heads, all agreed that Tracy had something special. And young Clint took note. He watched Tracy's work carefully, studying how he handled a scene, how he reacted instead of performed. In Tracy, Eastwood also saw a sense of humanity. There was no vanity in Tracy's roles. He wasn't trying to be the hero. He wasn't trying to steal the spotlight. He was just telling the story. That attitude deeply influenced Eastwood's own approach, especially as he transitioned into directing. He prefers actors who are present, grounded, and not caught up in their own ego. It's why his sets are famously quiet and focused. Everyone's there to do the work, just like Tracy. Even behind the camera, Tracy's impact is felt. Eastwood has said that when casting his films, he looks for actors who feel real, who can bring authenticity to a scene without being overly dramatic. That's straight from the Spencer Tracy playbook. Keep it simple. Be honest. Don't act. Just be.
People everywhere could have a safer and a brighter light.
One of Tracy's most famous quotes was, "Know your lines and don't bump into the furniture." On the surface, it sounds like a joke, but there's deep wisdom in that simplicity. To Eastwood, it's a reminder that acting is about being present, prepared, and unself-conscious. It's not about tricks, it's about truth. Tracy's influence can also be seen in how Eastwood handles dialogue. Like Tracy, he often underplays emotion. He lets pauses speak, he lets silences stretch. In movies like $1 Million Baby or Mystic River, you can see the Tracy effect. characters navigating grief, fear, or conflict not through speeches, but through glances, through posture, through presence. To Clint Eastwood, Spencer Tracy wasn't just a great actor, he was a blueprint. A reminder that greatness doesn't have to be loud, that real strength lies in being real, and that sometimes the most compelling thing an actor can do is nothing at all. Number 2, Gene Hackman. No finer actor. If there's one actor Clint Eastwood never hesitated to praise in full, it's Gene Hackman. The admiration runs deep, not just because Hackman is an exceptional performer, but because he embodies everything Eastwood values in an actor: authenticity, intensity, and zero pretension.
Oh boy.
When Clint says, "There was no finer actor than Gene," intense and instinctive, never a false note, he means it. And coming from Eastwood, that's practically a knighthood. Their most famous collaboration, Unforgiven, 1992, didn't just win Oscars, it created a lasting friendship built on mutual respect. Hackman won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his chilling portrayal of Little Bill Daggett, a brutal sheriff whose sense of justice is as twisted as it is believable. It's the kind of role that demands power without theatrics, and Hackman nailed it. Eastwood, both director and co-star in Unforgiven, was blown away. Hackman brought a quiet menace to the role, never overacting, never reaching for effect. He just was. That's Eastwood's kind of performance, the kind that doesn't scream, "Look at me," but instead pulls you in with complete honesty. What Eastwood saw in Hackman wasn't just talent, it was integrity. Hackman's instincts were razor sharp. He didn't need endless takes or elaborate direction. He understood the scene, the character, the moment, and he delivered. Clint once said, "You don't direct Gene Hackman, you just let him do what he does." That's the ultimate compliment from a director who believes in getting it right the first time. But what truly solidified Hackman's place in Eastwood's personal Hall of Fame was his attitude. No drama, no ego, no star behavior, just pure professional focus. Hackman never seemed interested in celebrity. He only cared about the work, and that mirrored Eastwood's own sensibilities. In fact, both men shared a healthy skepticism toward Hollywood's glitz and glamour. They didn't chase awards, they chased the truth in a character. After Unforgiven, the two stayed in touch. And even though Hackman eventually retired from acting in the early 2000s, Eastwood continued to champion his legacy. In interviews, he's referred to Hackman as one of the last greats, a throwback to a time when actors didn't rely on gimmicks or flash, just skill, just presence. Eastwood also admired Hackman's range. From cops and criminals to presidents and psychos, Hackman could do it all. He could be terrifying in Mississippi Burning, heartfelt in the Royal Tenenbaums, or explosive in The French Connection. Yet, no matter the role, Hackman never disappeared behind technique. He brought a raw, grounded energy that always felt real. That's what Eastwood loved most. Nothing about Hackman ever felt forced. One thing that bonded the two even more: their mutual dislike for Hollywood fluff. Neither of them ever fully played the game. Hackman walked away from acting on his own terms. Eastwood kept working, but never chased trends. They both had that rare quality, the confidence to go their own way. And maybe that's why they got along so well. In fact, Eastwood's tribute to Hackman after his retirement was one of the few times Clint really opened up about another actor. He spoke not just about the performances, but about the man, the humility, the professionalism, the absolute lack of phoniness. Hackman, in Clint's words, brought weight to every role he played. You believed him even when he was playing someone you weren't supposed to like. And that's the kicker. Hackman didn't try to make you love his characters. He made you understand them. Whether he was a villain, a hero, or something in between, he gave them dimension. Eastwood, who often plays morally complex characters himself, appreciated that nuance more than most.
You don't mind if I call you Clinton, do you? I feel like I know you so well.
To Clint Eastwood, Gene Hackman wasn't just a co-star or a colleague. he was a kindred spirit, a fellow craftsman who approached acting the same way Clint approaches life, with honesty, grit, and no time for nonsense. In a world full of actors trying to stand out, Hackman stood apart. And for Clint Eastwood, there may never be another quite like him. Number 1, James Cagney, Eastwood's all-time favorite. Ask Clint Eastwood to name his favorite actor of all time, and he doesn't hesitate. James Cagney. That's a bold choice for a man whose own image has defined cool toughness for generations. But when you look at the kind of actor Cagney was, fearless, electric, and unpredictable, it makes perfect sense. Eastwood once said, "I was never a fan of any one particular actor outside of James Cagney." That's a rare admission from someone who typically doesn't idolize anyone, and it tells you how much Cagney's energy shaped Eastwood's imagination as a young moviegoer. Cagney wasn't your typical hero. He played gangsters, hotheads, and firecrackers, a far cry from the strong silent types Eastwood later became known for. But that's precisely what captivated Eastwood. Cagney wasn't afraid. On screen, he burst with intensity, commanding attention whether he was smashing a grapefruit into someone's face in The Public Enemy or exploding in a hail of bullets in white heat. To Eastwood, that boldness was gold. He didn't just admire Cagney's energy, he studied it. One scene in particular stuck with him for life. In White Heat, Cagney's character casually eats a chicken leg during a tense standoff, as if danger were just another day at the office. It was unexpected, it was real, and it was pure Cagney. Eastwood loved that moment so much, he paid tribute to it in one of his most iconic scenes. In Dirty Harry, when Clint's character chomps down on a hot dog while gunning down criminals, it wasn't just a badass move. It was a nod to Cagney. Eastwood admitted the connection himself. That chicken leg moment inspired me. It was just so cool. But Cagney wasn't just about style. He had substance. Underneath all that explosive charisma was a deeply trained actor. Cagney was classically skilled, disciplined, and sharp. He could sing, dance, fight, and steal a scene without breaking a sweat. That range left a huge impression on Eastwood. It showed him that you could be tough and technical, wild and refined. Despite their wildly different acting styles, Eastwood drew serious lessons from Cagney's approach. Cagney didn't act like he was in a movie. He just was. Everything he did felt natural, even when it was outrageous. That authenticity is something Eastwood chased throughout his own career. He didn't want to perform for the camera. He wanted to live in front of it, just like Cagney. In many ways, Cagney gave Eastwood permission to take risks. Cagney's fearlessness told him that being memorable wasn't about saying the most lines or shouting the loudest. It was about finding the unexpected moments that ring true. Clint learned that sometimes the smallest gestures could be the most powerful. Whether it was a smirk, a pause, or a casual bite of a hot dog, it was all about presence. Eastwood has said of Cagney, "Movies were invented for Jimmy Cagney, and he was invented for movies." That line says it all. In Eastwood's eyes, Cagney didn't just belong on screen, he defined what being on screen meant. He wasn't trying to impress you, he just showed up, and magic happened. Cagney's influence didn't fade as Eastwood's career skyrocketed. Even as Clint became a global icon with his own brand of stoic cool, that Cagney spark was always there, a reminder to keep it real, keep it brave, and keep it interesting. In choosing Cagney as his number 1, Eastwood is tipping his hat not just to a performer, but to a spirit. A spirit of guts, creativity, and sheer joy in the craft. Cagney was the guy who didn't play by the rules, and neither did Eastwood. So it's fitting that Clint's favorite actor wasn't some flawless golden boy. It was the scrappy, fast-talking, scene-stealing original. The guy who danced down the stairs in Yankee Doodle Dandy and screamed, "Top of the world, ma!" before going out in a blaze of glory. James Cagney didn't just act, he exploded. And to Clint Eastwood, that was everything. Clint Eastwood's favorite actors aren't just names on a list, they're reflections of who he is. He admires boldness, honesty, and craft. From Cagney's fire to Cooper's quiet strength, each one left a mark on him that shaped his own legendary path. These weren't just stars. They were teachers, examples of how to live truthfully on screen. At 94, Eastwood still believes in the power of a great performance. And if you watch the films of the men he admires, you'll see exactly why. Their legacy lives on, not just through cinema, but through Clint himself.